Story 1. The Gas Station Stalker. It was a cold, crisp Christmas Eve when my family and I decided to make the drive home after a lovely evening at a nearby restaurant. The streets were eerily quiet, as Christmas Eve often is, and I could feel the weight of the holiday wrapping itself around the city like a blanket. My parents were exhausted, my younger siblings practically asleep in the back seat, but I remained wide awake, full of energy despite the late hour. The 45-minute drive home felt longer than usual. My little sister was complaining about how her best friend hadn't gotten her a Christmas gift, and though it was a trivial complaint, that night it felt out of place. The air was thick with tension, like something was brewing beneath the surface. As we passed through the outskirts of town, my dad decided to pull into a gas station to pick up a pack of cigarettes. It was a small, dimly lit place, tucked away just off the main road. I stayed in the car, too tired to get out, and began playing a new game I'd downloaded on my phone. The minutes passed by in a blur, but then something caught my attention. The clock on the dashboard. 10 minutes had gone by, which seemed odd. Everyone else had gone inside for a bathroom break, yet they were still not back. I tried to brush off the strange feeling that started creeping up on me, but it was as if the air itself had changed. I glanced up, and that's when I saw him. Standing under the flickering streetlight by the gas pumps was a man. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe around 5 feet 9 inches, but there was something unnerving about his posture. He stood stiffly like a mannequin, his arms hanging loosely by his sides. His face was partially obscured by the darkness, but I could see enough to know something wasn't right. His expression was completely blank, almost lifeless. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was staring directly at me, his gaze piercing through the car window. I tried to look away, hoping it was just my imagination, but my heart began to race when I realized he was moving closer. The man didn't walk. He glided, his steps unnaturally slow, like he was trying to remain unnoticed. But there was no mistaking it. He was coming for me. Just then my dad and the rest of the family returned, oblivious to what had been happening. I barely heard my father's explanation about an argument with the cashier. My attention was fixed entirely on the man. He had stopped in his tracks and was now glaring at us, his face twisted into an expression of annoyance, as though our presence was an inconvenience to him. We hurriedly drove off, my dad muttering something about the delay, but the strange man's image stayed with me, burned into my mind. The whole ride home I kept thinking about his blank stare, that odd posture, and the unsettling way he had moved. I told myself I was overreacting, but the anxiety gnawed at me. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I tried to distract myself by watching YouTube videos in my bedroom. The storm outside was fierce, with wind howling and rain beating against the window. Usually I loved the sound of storms. It made me feel safe, like the world outside couldn't reach me. But not tonight. Tonight the storm only amplified my unease. Suddenly, a loud thud against the window jolted me out of my thoughts. My heart skipped a beat. I had assumed it was just the wind or a bird, but when I looked out the window, I froze. There, standing in the middle of our driveway, drenched from the rain, was the same man from the gas station. He was staring directly at me through the window, his face illuminated by the weak glow of the streetlights. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, and he was grinning. A slow, twisted smile that made my stomach churn. It wasn't a friendly smile, but something much darker, something sinister. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Finally, I found my voice and let out a terrified yell. Within moments, my dad was in my room, his face filled with panic. I tried to explain, stammering about the man from the gas station, but my dad didn't waste any time. He grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and told me to call the police. As I fumbled with my phone, my eyes kept darting back to the window, half expecting the man to appear there, smiling that unnerving smile. I managed to dial the police, and it felt like an eternity before they arrived. When they did, they assured us they would take care of it. But the relief was short-lived. The officers soon found the man hiding in our shed at the back of the property. I could hardly believe it when they told us. The man had been there, right under our noses, lurking in the dark, trying to break in. The shed was the one place on our property where we had left the door unlocked. How long had he been there? What had he been planning to do? The officers took the man away, but as they drove off, I caught a glimpse of him in the back of the police car. He was staring at our house, that same creepy smile still plastered on his face. The next day, my dad and I inspected the property. When we checked the back door, I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. The handle had been damaged, scratched, and twisted, like someone had been trying to force their way inside. I couldn't help but shiver at the thought. How close had he been? What would have happened if he had gotten in? To this day, I can't go to a gas station alone without feeling that familiar prickle of fear on the back of my neck. And when I lock my doors at night, I often find myself checking them multiple times, haunted by the image of that man's blank, grinning face watching me from the shadows. I still don't know who he was or what he wanted, but the memory of that Christmas Eve will never fade. The Christmas lights on the house never seemed quite as warm again, and the quiet of the night never felt safe. The man at the gas station didn't just invade our space that night. He invaded my sense of security, and I've never felt quite the same since. Story 2. The Christmas Eve Intruder. It was supposed to be a quiet Christmas Eve. My family had split up this year, so instead of spending the night together, we took turns celebrating with different sides of the family. This year, I had decided to head home early from my grandparents' house, just to enjoy a few hours of solitude. The house was empty, save for the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights twinkling in the corner. I was looking forward to a rare moment of peace. No kids running around, no relatives crowding the living room, just me, a stack of DVDs, and the comfort of being in my own space. I pulled into the driveway and noticed something out of place. Across the street, there was an unfamiliar car parked along the curb. It didn't seem particularly odd. It looked like an average sedan. But it was strange to see a car there, especially since I knew everyone on the block. I shrugged it off, assuming it belonged to one of the neighbors or their relatives. It was Christmas, after all, so guests were common. I locked the door behind me and settled into the living room, the smell of leftover holiday food still lingering in the air. The fire crackled in the hearth, and I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. As I sat back to relax, a knock came at the door. It was sharp and insistent, and it sent a strange chill through me. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not this late on Christmas Eve. For a moment, I hesitated. I stood up slowly and walked to the door, peering through the peephole. A man stood on the doorstep. He wasn't particularly threatening in appearance. He had dark hair, glasses, and was dressed in a casual jacket and jeans. But there was something off about him. His eyes were too vacant, his expression too blank. He didn't smile or greet me in a friendly manner. He simply stared at the door as if waiting for it to open. "Is that car for sale?" he asked, his voice oddly calm and low, almost like he was trying to keep something hidden beneath his words. I was taken aback. I don't think so," I stammered, still unsure what to make of him. He shifted slightly, looking past me through the crack in the door, his gaze flicking nervously toward the interior of the house. "Is there someone here I can talk to about it?" His voice was still too calm, too steady, and my gut told me something wasn't right. "No," I replied quickly. "No one's home. You should try again, later." I wasn't trying to be rude, but something about this man set off alarms in my head. He didn't seem like someone with a genuine question. He seemed off. I shut the door before he could say anything else and locked it behind me. I stood still for a moment, heart racing, trying to shake off the strange feeling crawling up my spine. But then, just as I was about to turn away, I heard it. The sound of the door handle jiggling. It was subtle at first, just a faint twist of the knob, but then it became more insistent. The man was trying to open the door. Panic surged through me. I backed away slowly, trying to stay as quiet as possible. My eyes darted around the room, looking for anything to defend myself with. I reached for the phone, my hands trembling. The jiggling of the handle grew louder, accompanied by a series of heavy knocks, each one more forceful than the last. It wasn't just a simple knock now. It was a pounding, violent, as though the man was trying to break through. I could hear the wood of the door creaking with each blow. My breath caught in my throat, and I dropped to my knees, moving slowly toward the hallway, away from the door. My mind raced. What was he after? What did he want? And more importantly, why was he so desperate to get inside? As I crawled toward the back of the house, I suddenly remembered the garage door, the one that had a broken lock, the one I'd been meaning to fix for weeks but kept putting off. My stomach dropped as I realized that if he managed to get in through the garage, he'd be inside the house in seconds. I heard the distinct sound of the garage door creaking open, and then footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps that echoed through the house, heading toward the laundry room door. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the nearest thing I could find, a heavy metal paperweight sitting on the coffee table. I gripped it tightly, my fingers white with fear. Just then, I heard a shout from outside. A familiar voice. "Hey!" my uncle yelled. I froze. The man in the garage didn't. He didn't hesitate. The sound of footsteps moving quickly toward the back of the house, the distant thud of boots against the cold concrete of the driveway, told me everything I needed to know. The man was running. I rushed to the window, and that's when I saw him. My uncle running after the man, shouting for him to stop. The man was bolting down the street, disappearing into the shadows. My uncle chased him briefly, but stopped short, his breath heavy and confused. When he returned, his face was a mix of anger and concern. He came inside, his eyes immediately finding me crouched in the corner, clutching the paperweight like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. He wrapped an arm around me, trying to calm my shaking body, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He was just as shaken as I was, if not more. We immediately called the police, but without a plate number or a good description of the man, there was little they could do. An officer came and took our statements, but there was no sign of the man. No sign of him at all. The police did a quick sweep of the neighborhood, but nothing came of it. The man had vanished into thin air. The next day, my uncle and I inspected the house, looking for any signs that the man had made it inside. When we checked the back door, a chill ran down my spine. The handle was damaged, scratched and twisted, as if someone had tried to force it open. My stomach sank. The man hadn't just knocked. He had been trying to break in. That realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd been so close to being alone with a man who, in hindsight, had far darker intentions than just asking about a car. I still think about that night, every time the holidays roll around. I'm no longer able to stay home alone on Christmas Eve, or any holiday for that matter. The memory of the man at my door, the pounding on the wood, and the cold realization that he had tried to break in, it all still lingers. I often wonder what would have happened if my uncle hadn't come home when he did. Would I have been alone with him? What might he have done if he had gotten inside? To this day, I can't shake the fear that maybe, just maybe, that man is still out there. And every Christmas Eve, as the night grows dark and quiet, I double-check the locks on the doors. Story 3. The Naked Man with a Hatchet. On a lonely stretch of highway, where the only sounds are the hum of the tires and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees, a couple's peaceful drive takes a chilling turn. They had been driving for hours, making their way through the dense, quiet woods that lined the road, unaware that the night was about to plunge them into a terror they would never forget. It began when they spotted him, a figure in the distance, standing motionless by the edge of the forest. At first, the man appeared to be just another traveler stranded by the side of the road, perhaps someone in need of help. But as the car approached, the couple saw something far more disturbing. A naked man, his skin smeared with mud, standing eerily still. In his hand, he gripped a hatchet, its blade glinting faintly under the moonlight. The unsettling image froze them in their tracks. The narrator, a man of logical thinking, slowed the car, deciding to pull over and investigate. His girlfriend, sensing something was terribly wrong, urged him to keep going, but curiosity got the better of him. He parked the car at a distance and stepped out, trying to get a better look. As he crept closer to the tree line, the figure didn't move. It was as if the man were waiting, watching, calculating. His gaze was locked on the narrator, cold and unblinking. Before the narrator could get any closer, his girlfriend, now frantic with fear, blared the horn of the car. The sound echoed through the night, slicing through the eerie silence. The man, startled, didn't move immediately. But then, in a sudden motion, he raised the hatchet as though ready to strike. The narrator's heart pounded in his chest. He froze, unsure whether to run or stand his ground. In the tense moments that followed, the man slowly lowered the hatchet. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The figure turned and disappeared into the shadows as quickly and mysteriously as he had appeared. The narrator stood motionless, his mind racing with 1,000 questions, but no answers. The couple retreated to the car and drove off in a rush, their nerves frayed, their hearts still pounding from the encounter. When they reached the nearest town, they reported the incident to the local police. The officers seemed skeptical but promised to investigate. The search was swift, but no trace of the naked man was found. No signs of a struggle, no footprints, no hatchet, nothing to explain what they had witnessed. The man had vanished without a trace, as though he were nothing more than a figment of their collective imagination. Despite the investigation, the couple's nightmare didn't end there. The woman, who had once been fearless, now had trouble sleeping, haunted by the image of the man lurking in the woods. But it was the narrator who felt the full weight of the encounter. Weeks later, as they drove down that same highway, a strange sense of dread washed over him. His eyes constantly flicked to the roadside, scanning the trees, expecting to see the man again. The memory of the chilling encounter of that naked figure standing in the dark remained with him. And although time passed and the world moved on, the question lingered in his mind. Who was that man? Why had he been there in the middle of nowhere, naked and armed with a hatchet? And most terrifying of all, why had he been waiting for them? Some say the forest hides many secrets. Perhaps this man was one of them, an eerie reminder that not everything in the woods is as it seems. Every time the narrator passed that stretch of highway, his heart still raced, and the shadows of the trees seemed to whisper a warning. Even in daylight, when the road should have been safe, the eerie feeling of being watched lingered. And some nights, when the wind howled through the forest, he swore he could hear the distant sound of a hatchet cutting through the air. Had they escaped? Or had they just unknowingly entered a world where reality and nightmares blurred into one?